my top 5 grant writing tips. This top 5, of course, is coming from the very important piece of Americana, the movie High Fidelity with starring John Cusack. My childhood boyfriend that didn't quite know that he was my childhood boyfriend. But anyway, the point is, it's a very important movie. You should watch it. So here we go. Number 1, grants are a functional document, and therefore you should write them accordingly. So what do I mean by functional? I mean that it is not your manifesto about some problem that you think is very important. It is not a review of all the literature and all the prior stuff that's ever been written on said topic. It is not even a call to action of some sort among that problem, but rather it is a transactional document in which you are seeking to make the argument that this problem should be solved in this way by you and your team. And if we are successful, it will make this difference in the world. And that's it. And I wish I could say that it took me 15 minutes to learn this lesson. And instead, it took me about 10 years to learn this lesson. And when I fully let it sit in my heart, it made grant writing a lot easier. And it also made it a lot easier to deal with grants that weren't discussed, because what I instead had previously seen as a rejection of me or as a rejection of this important idea was instead, I didn't make the argument in the way I needed to make it. And let me figure out how I can make the argument better. So my grant writing tip for what this means for your writing is that for everything that you write in this grant, which is not infinite, part of the thing that makes grant writing so difficult is that you have such a short period of time amount of space to make your point, is I would ask myself, does this paragraph or does this figure or does this table serve this function? And if not, get rid of it. And that, as I'm sure you know, deleting things is very, very painful because it's so hard to create things. And so sometimes you lie to yourself and oh, I could still use it, or I could just make it smaller. No, get rid of it. Okay, that's my first tip. My second tip is you need to talk to program officers early and often. How? So, back here. How do you talk to program officers? Because of course, this is where you really find out if you have severe social anxiety. And the answer is yes, you do, but it's okay. We can learn to live with it. So you can talk to them about specific program announcements or specific RFAs, requests for applications. You can attend an NIH webinar, and then they will usually either be available in the chat, or you'll get their name in the chat, or you could say, hey, I attended your webinar. I had some questions about X, Y, or Z, right? It becomes a reason to have a conversation. But the most productive way to speak to a program officer is to give them your aims page, your specific aims page. That is, give them something to respond to. And why is that the most important way to talk to them? Because their job is to help you. Their job is to improve the quality of applications and the number of applications that are of high quality science by dedicated, smart people, i.e. you, that come into NIH so they can fund the most important science and move and fix everything, right? So they want to get to know you and your science. They literally, this is part of their job description. And because they know how hard it is for you to do what it is that you're trying to do. And so they can give feedback. I've had program officers give me literally written feedback, not track changes type of stuff, but written feedback on I reflected on this aim and I'm nervous about this, or I see you're building here, but is that really where you want to put your focus? The hard questions that it can be very difficult for us to ask ourselves, even if they don't have the answer. They can actually get you to deal with the question that maybe you're having trouble actually facing head on. My third tip is that this aims page that I've just mentioned is the most important text of the grant. The way that this was explained to me when I was in your shoes is that the aims page determines how good your score could possibly be. Everything after that only makes it go down. Okay, so like there's nobody who kind of gets to page 11 of the grant and is like, oh my God, finally, I can see it. I can see how brilliant this idea is. No, if the idea is not coming off page 1 as this problem, which is important, and it should be solved in this way by your team. And if you are successful, it will make this difference in the world. If those things are not clear in one page, it's the rest of it is not going to help. Okay. So what is on this aims page? Usually you say 2 to 4 aims. I don't know if I've ever had more than 3. One question that kind of comes up, and this is a little bit of a disciplinary point of art, I would say, is that do you have hypotheses under some aims? Are the aims, sometimes I do, but if I don't, I always repeat the actual aim in the analysis section. And so I'll put the hypotheses there. So if I have, obviously you should probably have some sort of hypothesis. It doesn't have to be on that same, on the main aims page. You can put it in another place. So that's where I often put mine. This aims page, this is true for the whole grant, but it's particularly on the aims page. You must write in simple, clear sentences. Each paragraph should have one and only one point, and that point should be made in the very first sentence of that paragraph, with the following sentences simply there to justify, support, or describe the details of that first sentence. That is, if all I read was the first sentence of each paragraph, I could have a 10,000-foot view of everything that you're trying to do in this grant, right? That's the way to write a grant. So the fourth tip is to reconceptualize preliminary data. Is not preliminary data, but rather is something, a concept I like to think about is called work to date, which is actually before the NIH went to the 12-page R01 structure that we have currently. Prior to that, it was a 25-page and sometimes even longer grant structure. And that section of the grant used to be called worked to date. And I've always thought about that. Like, what does that even mean? And what it means is the section is really around what have you done on this topic? Or what have you, so not just prelim data for each specific thing, right? But rather you can think about like all of the work you've done on this area to date. So the way to rephrase this maybe is like, what is the purpose of prelim data? Well, it's to demonstrate proof of concept, and you can do that. You don't have proof of concept, feasibility, that you have access to a population. Maybe you need an initial effect size or something, or that you have team experience or expertise on a topic. What that means is that you don't have to necessarily have conducted just like a mini version of all aspects of your project in order to write the grant. You don't have to have every little thing worked out, but rather if you can demonstrate proof of concept and feasibility and sort of the strength of the team, they know that you need the money in order to do the work. You know what I mean? So for example, like, do you have prior publications on the topic, even if it's with different data? That can serve as preliminary data. Do you have experience collecting data using some method, even if it's not in this specific setting? That is preliminary data. Do you have any? You don't have any data, right? Well, use ICPSR to use data from ICPSR's publicly available data set or data archive to generate preliminary findings, which is especially good for power analyses. If you need to kind of understand the size of a specific population, et cetera, right? So really kind of, I think sometimes I would get hung up on like, well, I need the pilot to like test everything. And then I can I'm just going to ask for more money to do a bigger version of the pilot. No, don't think about the pilot as just a small version of the big thing. The pilot is to see for you to make all the mistakes so you don't make them in the big thing, right? So the big thing shouldn't just be bigger. It should have learned from the prelim data. So think about the work to date as all the stuff where you did all your learning about your problem, and how you're going to solve it and your approach and things like this. My final tip is that grant writing is and will ever be an emotional roller coaster, but that you can do it. And I promise it will get easier the more you do it. Grants require a major investment of time and energy. There is no other way to get around it. I've never written a grant that didn't require nights and weekends, never. I always talk to my family to let them know that I've got a grant, let them know when I'm going to need support, when I'm going to need to be out of the house, or I'm going to need them to be out of the house, or whatever the case may be, so I can get the space that I need. So you need your team there to know what you need and let them know. I usually plan for at least 6 to 9 months of actual writing that typically involves getting meetings with people that you trust to talk about your ideas. So writing doesn't necessarily mean actually pen to paper, but just kind of talking, giving it the headspace. All right, so you can get ready to the point to write. As an example, the last grant that I submitted, which was in July, it took me about 2 years to write, really. When I say, and again, I say write, and that included 18 months of conversations with people that ended up becoming co-investigators on the team, just talking about the ideas, making connections with other senior people, talking to the PO, then about 2 months to prepare prelim data, then 3 months about budgeting, getting connected with vendors, right? Once we knew what we were going to do, and then 6 months of writing. Like that's what it took, right? Don't be intimidated by that. This is a huge grant. This is the largest grant I've ever written. And like, who knows, I'll find out in a couple of weeks if it gets scored. But that I just want to be straight with you. Like, some part of what, if we can adjust our expectations, then I think we can at least make the emotions a little bit more manageable. And then again, this emotional roller coaster. So there's the emotion of just getting the grant out the door, then you get the result. And you're going to get these summary statements, and like most things, it's very hard to see the good when they come back. You just see all the critique. And so but you've got to talk to somebody. You got to sit with that. You got to talk to your program officer again, even if the grant was not discussed, even if they did not discuss your grant, you should still get on the phone with the program officer and say, these are things I can see that I got some ideas about how I might be able to address some of these limitations, or I'm thinking about going to, they pointed out this weakness that I knew was there, but I didn't know how kind of central it was, but I'm thinking of going in a new approach or a new direction, or I think I need to bring on a new collaborator. Can you help me think about who that might be? So just because your grant wasn't discussed does not mean that you should not be coming back to the program officer. My first RO1, it took me 4 times to get a score. Okay, 4 times to get a score on this grant before, and then it took me 2 rounds to get it funded after it got scored the first time. So you got to do this. And then here's my last slide. I am the bottom person. If any of you have ever had a conversation with me, you know that like the way I tell a story, and maybe this is also how you tell a story, is this bottom person, right? All of the pre-context, all of the side things, blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. Like, maybe that's entertaining. But listen, you cannot write a grant that way. You must write a grant even though the world is as complex as it is in the bottom, your grant must be the line. All right. Because your reviewers may be somebody who doesn't know the topic, right? There's no guarantee that the person that gets assigned to review your grant is going to be an expert in even like your subfield, much less your main field, who has limited time to look at this and who is not being compensated much. Which of these is going to be, but they want to do a good job by you. So which of these stories will they be able to appreciate, understand, and more importantly, be able to explain to somebody else about what the hell happened, right? Because that's what your reviewer has to do in the discussion with the other reviewers. They have to say, this is a new grant by Dr. Mezuk. She is proposing to do this. She has this team here, yada, 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 right? Like that's what happens in the study section. So my advice in my closing comment here is to be the line. I guess that's technically 6, but you know what I mean. I'm going to put these slides in the chat while DeAnnah gets started with hers. So that's my brief little thing. I'm going to ask folks, thank you, Sherry. I'm going to ask folks to hold questions because of the way that we're, because of the recording, but I'm going to throw the things in the chat. So, and you can also just throw your questions in the chat. We'll get to them when we get there. Okay.
Hey, Bree, can you make me a co-host so I can share
I
my
sure
screen?
can.
And I'm not as fancy as Bree. I'm going to have to ask her how she does Google Slides. So I can't just drop mine in the chat, y'all. But maybe she can show me how she does them. But I'm still happy to share my slides. Absolutely. And I can send them to you guys as a group, and then I'm sure Brie will make sure you get them. So, okay, perfect. So let me share my screen. I have a lot going on, y'all. I got like more than one screen. So can you guys see that, or what are you seeing?
We see it. It's in the, it's not in the presenter mode yet, though.
Okay, so let's see.
Oh, wait, you moved it away. Now we don't see it.
Oh, you don't see it. Okay, let's stop.
It was there and then it went away.
Oh, no. All right. 1 minute. Okay, let's try that again. Do you guys see it?
Yep.
Okay, and then let's do presenter view. Wait, I just want regular view.
No,
is
we're
that
on. Yeah, you got it. Perfect.
awesome? All right, so Bree did such a good job. I'm honestly going to kind of piggyback on some of the things that Bree said, but I'm going to emphasize some little nuances that I've learned. So I titled this 5 Things I Learned While Applying for a KO1 grant. I definitely, number one, learned more than 5, but for the sake of you guys, I'm just going to give them to you, right? That way, if you're like, hey, I checked out, DeAnnah, by the time you got to slide 15, well, just all you got to do is pay attention to slide 1. So first and foremost, get started. I think that like you've heard that, but that's so difficult. Write the aims page first. Then of course, make sure you use the instructions to address all components of the career development plan. I'll have a lot more slides on that. Don't overlook the responsible conduct of research. I can't emphasize this enough. This is like this 1-page document that you think is like so unimportant, seemingly, but it's not. And then of course, I would definitely say, make sure you use some grant writing resources or some workshops, which I'll have a few at the end. All right. So how do you get started? This is the very first thing you do. I don't know about Bree, I don't know about others, but I cannot emphasize this enough. Like, number one thing you do is go get the program announcement. This will become, I don't know if you believe in Jesus or a higher power, but I say this is your Bible. It is really true, you guys. Like, you need to be able to print this out, read it very carefully. It has everything you need to know in there, right? So don't even listen to anybody else. First, read this program announcement in detail, very carefully, understand it. And then note the key dates in there. So that will really help you to know when you're going to apply, right? So they only accept applications. Typically, there's 4 grant cycles every year. Depending on maybe the type of K that you're applying, that could change. So know the key dates, because you don't want to say like, hey, I'm going to submit in the fall and you miss it. Then you have to wait till the next cycle. Okay. And based off of when you say, hey, I'm going to apply this date, then you want to start to develop a timeline around that. That's sort of like, number one. The second thing I would say is, listen, I know it's scary, right? Like, it's like, I'm applying for a grant. What? That sounds like it's scary. And, you're on summer and, you might be working in the summer to try to meet a fall deadline. So you're just like, I'll come back to this at Halloween. No, hopefully you'll have the grant in by the time Halloween rolls around. So that's the goal here, right? So in terms of the specific aims page, Bree touched on this, like this is the most important document, right? But let me just give you the mechanics, right? This is kind of like what the actual aim page should really contain. This is the content, okay? So a little bit different. So you definitely want to have that introductory paragraph. It's like, if I don't read anything except that first paragraph, I want to be drawn in for that first paragraph to read the rest. So that paragraph is really crucial. Okay. You're going to talk about how you're addressing either a gap in the existing knowledge in this paragraph. You're going to provide some statistics around what the problem or the health issue is. Like, you're going to make it really clear right away from the reader's attention, like this is something that needs to be addressed. It's very simplistically. Then you want to think about your goals and your rationale. So you want to sort of start broad, and then you want to move into the more specifics of your own work, right? Like, what is really the objective here? Why is it that you want to even sort of address the larger issue that you just raised in the introductory paragraph? Okay. And then you really want to get to, so those sort of maybe like the first 2 paragraphs, depending, right? The number of paragraphs isn't strict. It's not, hard and rigid, but there are definitely a specific aims paragraph. This is a standalone paragraph, separate of anything else. This is where you talk about your research design and your hypotheses. I would strongly encourage you to include your hypotheses. Some people don't. Guess it depends on spacing, and that's really maybe a personal preference. But in my experience, Ames pages that have a clear statement of their hypotheses and a clear direction. Okay. I remember when I met with my program officer, he said, "Hey, DeAnnah, this hypothesis is not so clear. What's the direction that you're thinking that you'll see an association between these variables?" That was really helpful feedback, right? So you want to make it very easy for whoever that reviewer is that picks up your page. Hey, I get it. I get why they're even doing this work. And then the last paragraph, some people call this the payoff paragraph. This is really where you just talk about the significance or the innovation or the impact, the larger impact that your work is going to. So the way I think about an Ames page, very simplistically, is I think about it like it's an hourglass, right? You start broad, you narrow to your work, and then you come back out large. And that's the paragraph, right? That payoff paragraph. Okay, so that's one way to sort of think about it in terms of just a picture of it. Okay, now I can't say this enough. So a K is unique than any other type of grant. The K01 is an investment in you as an investigator. Okay, what it really means is that it's investing in your ability to develop as an independent scholar. You're going to hear that so much that you're going to be like, I don't even know what that means anymore. You just keep saying that, but I don't know, what does that mean? And I still ask that, like, what does independence mean? Because we think we're independent, right? The minute we get our first faculty, we're like, I know what I'm doing. But when you're writing a K01, they really, really want to see that you know what you're doing and you're moving towards independence, okay? So this career development plan, they literally have very clear instructions for each of these three components: your background, your career goals and objectives, and then your plan for your own specific career development during the award period, okay? And I'm going to address each of these based off of simply what I took from the instructions, okay? I'm not going to read all of this because you guys will have my slides, but this is the specific instructions that came from the program announcement, or the RF. They do a really good job of telling you what they want you to include in your candidate background, right? So it tells you, right, like, what's your commitment to a health-related research career? You need to describe that, right? So they actually tell you paragraph by paragraph what they're actually expecting you to put into your background as a candidate, okay? What I would suggest that you do is you actually take those paragraphs from the instructions, put them in a Word document, and every single line or every sentence that they have there, I would write a response to every single one. That shows you that you are going to be, in fact, addressing every single point that they ask of you for the candidate's background. Okay, some of it may seem out of order. You may end up moving it around, but just as a place to start, literally when it says, what are your research efforts, right? Any publications, take this bullet, take it to a Word document, and literally write out a response to that specific component. And it will help you then formulate the other components of the application. For the career goals and objectives, it's really clear. It tells you, describe a systematic plan. Again, this is very clear instruction that shows a logical progression from prior research and training, right, to saying, hey, this is what I've done in the past, to then where you're going. And oh my goodness, there it is right there at the end. Then to independent investigator status, right? So you're going to see that a lot. Whoa, no, it's not even done. They say it like a second time. What were they talking about? That independent thing again. Here it is. That justifies the need for further career development to become, well, what do you know? An independent investigator. Okay, so really what you want to think about in terms of your background is saying, hey, this is who I am. The career goals and objective is saying, hey, I've had all this prior work, but now I'm going to show you where I'm going in terms of my career development. And it's so critical that I'm getting this career development plan laid out, because this is ultimately going to help me become that independent scholar that you are so saying very clearly that you would like to see. And then finally, for the career development plan, this can't be emphasized enough, okay? They literally say that the candidate and the mentor, they're jointly responsible for the preparation. Now, that's true, but what that really means is that you're gonna write it, and then you're gonna make sure you share it with your mentors, okay? So your mentor's not gonna write this, because that doesn't help you really, right? Because this is your trajectory and this is your career development. So make sure that you utilize your mentors when you're writing the career development plan, because they're the ones ultimately saying, hey, I'm gonna meet with this individual once a month or every 2 weeks. Yeah, we're going to do X, Y, and this. We're going to have this type of didactic or this type of training. Guess what? That's kind of important for them to know what the expectation is of them, right? And what they're ultimately committing to in terms of your career development. Okay, so that's really critical. And it's also really important, the last bullet point here, which you'll have all of this, is that you make it clear that you're going to have 75% of your time be protected, right? And your institution is going to support that, right? That's an actual, you'll get a letter from your institutional support or institutional commitment letter that basically says, hey, we're going to protect this candidate's time so that they can truly develop into that independent scholar, right? It's not just to, do something that you don't want to do, but really it's the goal here for you to fulfill that career development plan. Okay. The fourth point is this part that I mentioned earlier. I think we often think, oh, the RCR is the simplest part of the application, right? It's one page. It's like literally like the Ames page, but it's quite deceiving because like the Ames page, it actually is intensive in terms of what they're looking for. It's very critical and they're going to read it. Most committees will read whether or not you've addressed it. They don't like when you just sort of throw something together and just kind of brush it over. Okay, it's actually really important. And they say it very clearly. It must include this. So this is a requirement of your application. There's two key parts to the RCR. One is that you want to be able to clearly lay out any prior instruction or any participation that you've had in RCR training. Okay, basically where you're at during your career. So if you had some as a postdoc, or if you had some as an early career faculty, you want to say that, and you want to include the date, right? They want to know when you actually did these things, okay? And then what you want to include really next is the proposed plans that you have to receive additional instruction or to provide it, okay? That means that you participate as a guest lecturer or you hold a seminar on RCR. I'm doing one right now next week, actually, we have this series called Lunch and Learn, right? Where it's open to students and to faculty. And I'm going to be presenting on writing tips and RCR. Okay, so that fulfills my 9-hour requirement of RCR training that has to go each year of the grant, right? And so this is just reiterating what I said. Again, these are literally the instructions. They say the same thing, your prior instruction, your proposed plans. And then they also say, listen, this plan must address the 5 required instructional components as outlined where? In the application requirements, okay? So those 5 key components is essentially the next 2 slides, which is, again, you need to think about the format, okay? So whether this is going to be all face-to-face, whether it's going to be all virtual, or, all via Zoom. You need to think about the content, right? The subject matter. Are you going to talk about conflict of interest versus authorship or human subjects, right? So what is it exactly that you're going to cover when it comes to RCR? And then thinking about your faculty participation, it really needs to be clear that you're going to have your mentors involved in some way in your RCR training and your development. That could simply be like Bree, I'm in Bree's lab. So I'm going to go simply present to her lab and talk to her current students about authorship and what that looks like and the responsible conduct of research. Good things to know. The last 2 really is then thinking about how many hours of instruction. Okay, you're required to have 9. So they want to know, is this going to be, a lecture typically is about an hour, but you may then say, okay, well, it's going to take you an hour to prep. So then that would count for everything you do. That's 2 hours. So that shows them that you have carefully thought about the amount of time that they're asking you to commit to RCR, which is, again, typically the 9 hours, but the instructions will make it very clear in total. And then, of course, the frequency, whether or not you're going to, how often, for example, you're going to renew your RCR instruction, right? If you've let something expire, if that's every 3 years, if that's every 5 years, if there's something that's every year. So you want to make it really clear what you're going to do year by year. And you'll lay that all out. If I go back to the career development plan, you actually want to lay that out right within your career development plan. So all of these things, in addition to you writing them out, they can simply be included in terms of the frequency, right? Actually into your career development plan. And so it's a great way to show them, hey, I paid attention to the instructions. I put everything here for you, and it's very straightforward. The last thing, and this is sort of my last slide that I want to say, there's some great grant writing resources. So of course you can't ever go wrong with NIH. They have some amazing things around, just like a guide. It's huge. It could be intimidating, but these are really helpful resources because they not only provide, some like clear instruction, but they also sort of can tell you specifically, like, you know, the different types of mechanisms that's available to you in terms of which ones you should think about applying. The last thing I'll mention is the workshop that I personally took. This workshop was transformative. It was offered out of the University of Michigan. I hope it's still being offered. I put the website from 2022, but it was phenomenal. You were actually able to share your materials. So you were actually able to share an Ames page or share your career development plan. You got one-on-one feedback. They went through every single component of the K01 application. And I think it was usually over the length of a semester, right? So it allowed you some time to actually take their feedback, maybe tweak your documents, and then go back and get additional feedback. So I can't emphasize this enough. Like, you don't really have to do this all alone. It may seem that way, but really you don't. I mean, because even when you're working with your mentoring team, it's still very helpful to have resources outside of them. So that's how I will end. And of course, I'll share my slides with Bree so they can be passed on to, and Monica, so they can be passed on to you guys.
Thank you, DeAnnah. And we have done well with our timing. So we have plenty of time for questions, which is the best part about office hours, is all of the time for questions. But that means I'm going to pause the recording.